All right, y'all, welcome back to Anti-War Radio, Chaos 92.7 FM in Austin, Texas, streaming live from chaosradioaustin.org and from antiwar.com/radio. And our guest today is our in-house nuclear physicist at antiwar.com, Dr. Gordon Prather. He spent a career in the Navy at U.S. nuclear laboratories, the Lawrence Livermore and Sandia National Laboratory, was an advisor to senators, the chief scientist of the Army, and on and on and on like that. This guy, unlike the nuclear so-called experts quoted in your New York Times, actually knows a thing or two about nuclear weapons and knows a thing or two about how well the accusations against the so-called axis of evil countries might stand up to the facts. And that's why he's one of my favorite writers at Antiwar.com and one of my favorite guests on this show. Welcome back, Gordon.
Good to be back, Gus.
All right, now I got this article in front of me here, Aluminum Tubes, the sequel. Now, we all remember the original aluminum tubes that the neo-crazies claimed, even though the Department of Energy said, these are for rockets. They bought them on the open market, perfectly legal, no big deal. They spun this whole lie that Iraq's purchase of some aluminum tubes intercepted in Italy were part of an advanced nuclear weapons program of Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis to enrich weapons-grade uranium and then nuke us all in our jammies, as you like to say. So we all know that story, but now we have the sequel, another bunch of accusations about aluminum tubes, Doc?
Yeah, they basically go back to the same time frame, which was 2002, and this was in 2002 when Valerie Plame, in her non-proliferation activities, undercover covert activities, were involved in intercepting these things, and then there was a big hoo-ha within the CIA as to whether or not these tubes were for their intended purpose, which was to serve as bodies for rockets. 91-millimeter rockets, as I recall, is the diameter for the Iraqis. And then also, at the same time, we were claiming, this is in 2002, John Bolton and the rest of them, were claiming that North Korea was also involved in this and that they had a bunch of these aluminum tubes. As I say, there were some tests performed by some guy who was a consultant or an advisor to the CIA, and he maintained that they were only suited for, useful for making the rotors for gas centrifuges, and that was the basis for a lot of the statements made by Condoleezza Rice and all those kind of people back in those days. Okay. Well, it turns out, of course, that in the aftermath of Operation Iraqi Freedom, where we went in there and invaded and occupied the country under false pretenses, and discovered, at least to some people's horror, that the full, complete report that Saddam Hussein...
You're talking about the 12,000-page dossier that the U.S. actually stole and cut all the interesting parts out before they gave it to the UN?
I didn't know about that, but I do know that after Bush got the United Nations to Security Council to pass a resolution in, I think it was November, maybe it was October of 2002.
Right, Resolution 1441.
Yeah, okay. The Iraqis promptly turned over this full and complete accounting that had been required earlier under a previous UN Security Council resolution. And what we said was, well, there's nothing new in it. It's just like the one that you gave us back in 97 or 98 or something like that. Well, it turns out that the one they gave us back in 97 and 98 was virtually complete. And then the one that they did turn over in November of 2002 was complete. People such as Scott Ritter and everybody else has said, you know, that was truthful. It was the best accounting we'll ever have of all of the weapons of mass destruction programs under Iraq. Okay. So there was a parallel there, and it turns out that the aluminum tubes were exactly what the Iraqis claimed they were for. Okay, so we knew by the summer of 2003 that the Iraqis had basically been telling the truth at least for the last 10 years, and that all of these claims were false. But when we made these accusations against North Korea, essentially the same kind of accusations based upon the same kind of quote-unquote intelligence about these aluminum tubes, they didn't take it kindly. And President Bush used that accusation in the summer of 2002 as a rationale for unilaterally abrogating the agreed framework of 1994, and he cut off the oil shipments to North Korea, let them freeze in the dark. And so the North Korean says, well, the agreed framework is dead. Under the agreed framework, we had promised, President Clinton had promised to, I've got a section of it here I can read. The principal thing that the North Koreans would have gotten out of the agreed framework was, it says the U.S. will provide formal assurances to the DPRK, that's North Korea, against the threat or use of nuclear weapons by the U.S. Okay, that was the principal thing that the North Koreans had gotten out of that agreed framework, and in return they had agreed to freeze under IAEA supervision all of their activities, all their nuclear activities. In other words, the IAEA went in there and put locks and seals on every damn thing. Okay, well, when President Bush unilaterally abrogated that agreed framework, the North Koreans decided, well, maybe it's not such a good idea that we're still hampered by all these locks and seals on our nuclear stuff, and so we're going to withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty, and that will abrogate our IAEA safeguards agreement on all these nuclear facilities. We're going to take these seals off, and we're going to start running them again. And one of these things that we're going to start running again was a weapons-grade plutonium-producing reactor. Now, it was originally intended to be a research reactor, and it's small, and it was provided to them by the Soviets in the 80s. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in late 91, early 92, the Russians now came on and says, okay, you North Koreans have got to put this thing, make it subject to IAEA safeguards agreement, okay? And so it had been essentially all that time. In early 2003, the North Koreans, feeling they'd been provoked into doing it, withdrew from the non-proliferation treaty, which made their IAEA safeguards agreement null and void. They began to operate this reactor producing plutonium, and then they made a pointed announcement, which was, whereas their activities had been peaceful up till this time with respect to that reactor, from now on they were going to rethink what they were going to do with the plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium that they were producing in that reactor.
All right. Now, let me stop you there for a minute, Gordon, okay, and see if I can sum up what you've been teaching us here and tell me if I got this right.
Right.
Basically what happened was, just like the aluminum tubes myth that was used to bludgeon the people of America over the head into believing that Saddam Hussein was a nuclear weapons threat to them, they used the same lies against the North Koreans and said that these guys have a secret uranium enrichment program, so therefore we're breaking the deal. The Bush administration, we're breaking the deal that the Clintons made with the North Koreans because the North Koreans broke it first, they accused. So the North Koreans said, well, fine, if that's how you want to be. They withdrew from the non-proliferation treaty, as you just said, in the spring, I guess, or early part of 2003. They withdrew from the non-proliferation treaty. They kicked out the IAEA inspectors, and they started making nuclear bombs, not out of uranium, but out of plutonium from their old Soviet reactors that they had had.